Coming up on Nittany Nation Game Day, Penn State heads to USC to try taming the offensive genius that is Lincoln Riley. Ali Berube and Christian Hackenberg break that down, plus an update on Nick Singleton after he missed last week's game against UCLA. And this.
Now I kind of look at it and go, well, don't be an old stodgy guy and think about the old days of 10 teams. There's 18.
Brad Nessler talks about the new look Big Ten and conference realignment. All that and so much more on this week's Nittany Nation Game Day.
To it. The money is talking, I'm flowing, it's coming in just how I drew it. Yeah, you know what it is. Hey, we doing it big. Look up, there is no limit, no, we cannot settle for this. Yeah, can't stop, nah, won't stop. Yeah, it's been on live. You don't believe it, just watch.
Welcome to another week of Nittany Nation Game Day. I'm Andrew Clay. Ryan Risky by my side. It's Penn State and USC. It's the two's first meeting since the 2016 Rose Bowl thriller. Ryan, we would only be so lucky to get that kind of game.
Oh, absolutely. Penn State scored 49 in a loss that day, and you've got to wonder if the Nittany Lions have enough firepower to score 49 this weekend as injuries continue to be an issue.
Yeah, last week Penn State listed 16 players as out. Guys like KJ Winston, Cam Wallace, and Andrew Rappelier are impact players whose return this season is very much in doubt. But the injury, or at least absence, we've spent a lot of time talking about this week is Nick Singleton.
Yeah, Singleton missed the first game of his career last week in the Nittany Lions win over UCLA. His absence was noticeable in the run game. Singleton did practice on Wednesday in the portion that's open to the media. James Franklin says he expects Singleton to play this week, but he reminded us that that was also the case last Saturday when he sat out.
The trainers take those guys and work them out on their own, so that's part of the evaluation. And then Saturday, I wouldn't say he wasn't 100%, but again, we thought he was going to go. So I guess my point is he was very close to going last week. So as long as we don't have any setbacks this week, I would anticipate him going.
It's a small sample size, but without Singleton last week, the rushing attack really struggled to get going. With Wallace and Singleton out, it was all Katron Allen. As a group, Penn State was held to a season-low 85 yards, and that number that really jumps out. Penn State averaged nearly 10 carries of 10 or more yards through its first 3 games. They had just 2 of those on Saturday.
If he's ready to go, Singleton could be in for a big game. USC's rush defense has struggled this year, allowing 158 yards per game. The Trojans were gashed last week by Minnesota's Darius Taylor, who ran for 144 yards. It's been a slow and disappointing start for Lincoln Riley's 3-2 squad. Similar to last year when the team finished 8-5, the offensive guru said this week that the team has been in position to win games this year, something he couldn't always say a year ago.
As you keep progressing, you have a chance to win those and continue to put yourself in those positions. You grow, you get better. Hopefully, you start to separate in more games that maybe don't come down to one here or there, and that's just part of the process. I mean, each year is different, each schedule is different, each group of challenges are different. There is massive progress on a lot of areas right now. That's pretty clear. So we're in the moment right now and getting ready for a big one this week.
USC lost that game last week to Minnesota, and traveling time zones has not been friendly for Big Ten schools who are just 1-8 when going 2 or more time zones. That doesn't bode well for Penn State, who will travel more than 2,200 miles to Los Angeles. Nittany insider Ali Berube with me now. Ali, Penn State changed its usual travel plans to accommodate this cross-country flight.
Yeah, typically Penn State's going to take that trip on a Friday. They move that up to Thursday, and it's not really just moving it up, it's the logistics of how they had to do it. They took the bus 2 hours to Harrisburg first, then got on a jet in Harrisburg, flew out to LA. Some of those logistics, State College Airport, the runway's not long enough, the plane's too big, they'd have to stop to refuel. Harrisburg, they can do a direct flight. So immediately, right off the bat, your schedule is moved up 24 hours. But the good news is you get to go to California, get tuned up, get acclimated to that environment, start adjusting to that time change, because you know that's going to be a factor on some level. Obviously, it's worse coming west to east, but certainly something that Penn State wanted to focus on here. The thing is, Andrew, they have massive teams that look at this travel months in advance. You know, their sleep science is sound about when guys should be resting and when not. They've been dealing with this now for the last week, and so it's something that's not an unknown when they came into the season. They knew mid-season they'd have to adjust to it, but certainly that travel being moved up a day, these are creatures of habit, and that is necessarily something that could impact them.
I mentioned a moment ago the teams are 1-8 when traveling like this. Is the creatures of habit the big concern around Penn State?
Yeah, certainly there's some of that, right? It is difficult. It's the first season everyone's doing this coast-to-coast travel, so it's something everyone has to adjust to. Typically when you do this, you're doing it in a bowl scenario where you can go a week ahead of time, so that kind of get up and go is something that's difficult in the regular season. For Penn State, that get up and go has been difficult even at home in Beaver Stadium, or then if you go back to that first road trip to West Virginia to open the season. Through 5 first quarters, they only have 3 touchdowns. Those slow starts, something that we've talked about a lot. We're going to talk about coming up with Christian Hackenberg as well, but Penn State's going to want to come out, punch USC in the mouth. Otherwise, it's going to start to be a concern. How sluggish are they coming off the cross-country travel?
She's Ali Barubi. Ali, thank you very much.
Well, in other Penn State news, the Nittany Lions jumped up to number 4 this week in the AP Top 25, their first top 5 ranking since 2021. This week, the field hockey star Fia Gladio became the program's all-time leading scorer, and Gatorade announced a limited edition Nittany Frost Special Whiteout Gatorade that will be given away to 1,000 fans who win the company sweepstakes. Well, when we come back, we take a look at the new look Big Ten, flashing a great lineup. This week, we'll take a look.
We're also all in on Big Ten expansion talk. Steve Jones and CBS's Brad Nessler weigh in when Nittany Nation Game Day returns.
You're watching Nittany Nation Game Day.
What a matchup in the Big Ten. We've got Minnesota, or Washington, Iowa, Ohio State, and Oregon, Minnesota, UCLA. They all sound like bowl game, Ryans. Instead, they're all Big Ten regular season matchups. And this Penn State matchup as well feels a lot like a bowl game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a week filled with non-traditional yet marquee matchups. This is Penn State's first meeting with USC since the 2016 Rose Bowl and their first regular season meeting since they met at the Meadowlands in 2000. And it's not your granddaddy's league these days.
No, conference realignment is all over football, not just in the Big Ten. This offseason hit the Pac-12, ACC, SEC, and Big 12 quite hard. I spoke with CBS's Brad Nessler and Penn State's Steve Jones to talk about the changing college football landscape.
In the pregame show on radio, we'll talk about games coming up that day. And Oregon's playing UCLA. Well, that's a conference game. Minnesota's playing USC. That's a conference game. It's been interesting to see the dynamics change across the country.
Penn State broadcaster Steve Jones has been around college football for decades and was calling Nittany Lion games when Penn State kicked off one of the busiest periods of realignment back in the 1990s.
Leaving independence and joining a conference was really a long-term positive that Penn State needed at that particular time.
Penn State started playing football in the Big Ten in 1993, the same year Florida State joined the ACC, and a year after Arkansas and South Carolina began playing in the SEC. Brad Nessler, who was calling Saturday's game, also has had a front row seat to the change.
You know, when I started doing games, when I did Texas and Texas A&M, it was in the Southwest Conference. And now they're going to play each other in the SEC. When I started the Big Ten, it was, like I said, it was Big Ten teams. When I started doing games in the ACC, Florida State wasn't in the ACC, and now they want to get out of the ACC.
This year's realignment is perhaps the most impactful in 30 years. Former Pac-12 schools Stanford and Cal jetted to the ACC. Big 12 powers Oklahoma and Texas joined the SEC. While Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC were added to the Big Ten. The biggest conferences gobbling up teams, money, and power.
For Lincoln Riley, his job got more difficult. For James Franklin, his job got more difficult because the depth of the conference became greater.
Realignment will cause more than a few headaches. Look no further than Penn State's travel issues to Los Angeles this week. But the on-field product is hard to argue against. Some of Week 6's biggest upsets involve new conference foes, like wins by Minnesota over USC and Washington over Michigan. And the game of the week might as well have been Miami's comeback over, yes, the ACC's Cal Golden Bears. Nessler says he focuses on the good in change and realizes realignment has left us with some of the best college football matchups in years.
These matchups are Rose Bowl worthy just about every weekend. So that's kind of the neat part about it. And, you know, when I did Michigan and USC earlier this year, I was like, wow. And then Wisconsin and USC, and I'm like, okay, well, that never would have happened either unless they were playing in Pasadena. And so this one's the same way.
Saturday is a day the Big Ten has been waiting for. You have an afternoon game on CBS with Penn State and USC, and your nightcap is Oregon, Ohio State. And they're both Big Ten games. That's why the Big Ten's doing this. It's that kind of power where they can dominate 8 hours of television on a Saturday.
Brad Nessler was my guest this week on the Nittany Nation podcast. You can hear my full conversation with him on the Nittany Nation podcast channel right now on Apple and Spotify.
Last week's win moved Penn State to 5-0 for the fourth straight year. And get this, Andrew, they are the only program in the country who has done that in each of the past 4 seasons. The school's longest such streak, but good starts have been followed by cool finishes over the past 4 years. Penn State has followed up those 5-0 starts by going 13-11.
We got to do the things that we've done to this point to get us to be 5-0. That's something that we can control. We got to make sure that we're doing it for the long haul, and that's as the schedule goes on and as the opponents get more and more challenging, and as you have bumps and bruises and things like that that affect depth, you got to find solutions to give yourself the best chance to be successful.
When we come back, the details on this week's landmark case for the NCAA settlement, plus Ali Berube is one-on-one with Christian Hackenberg.
But first, Mark Mancuso has your game day forecast for sunny LA.
Hello, Penn State fans. I'm meteorologist Mark Mancuso, and here's a look at our forecast as the Nittany Lions head to the West Coast into Los Angeles, taking on the Trojans. And at kickoff, we'll see clouds mixed with some sunshine. Temperatures quite comfortable at 77 degrees. During the game, we'll be looking at temperatures creeping up into the upper 70s. Typical West Coast weather, we'll be looking at sunshine and gentle breezes.
You're watching Nittany Nation Game Day.
This week, a judge made a preliminary sign-off on a $2.8 billion settlement in the NCAA's antitrust lawsuit. The agreement gives $2.5 billion back to back pay to former student athletes. It sets up NIL governance and creates a profit-sharing model that allows schools to share more than $20 million with students. A final approval is scheduled for April. Now, each week, Ali Berube sits down with former Nittany Lion quarterback Christian Hackenberg to break down the matchup. We'll turn it over now to our Nittany insiders for a deeper look.
A 16-point win over UCLA has made the Nittany Lions 5-0 to start the season. A lot of things to be excited about. They've won games in a variety of ways. Hack, what are we seeing from the Nittany Lions through their first 5 games to give us confidence? Because now we know they're flying across country to take on USC this week.
Yeah, like you said, I think they've won a lot of different ways. The development on the offensive side of the ball, as I've said, has been, in my opinion, satisfactory up until this point. Defensively, still trying to figure out a few things, but ultimately, where they're at in the season, you like the positioning. At the end of the day, you can't argue with 5-0. They're in the driver's seat. And when you're in control of your own destiny, that's a great position to be in. So we'll just see as this thing kind of continues to transpire. This is going to be a great test against USC, at least on paper. This is going to be a great challenge for them. And then, you know, you have the Ohio State and the Washingtons of the world coming down the line. So they're in the driver's seat. Can they capitalize?
Yeah, certainly the bulk of their schedule coming up here. When you look at how they attack this stretch, how important is it, things like fast start, kind of that mentality that you need to start building?
Yeah, well, that's been a problem all year, and that's what ultimately plagued them during the Bowling Green game was just starting fast. And it was more so on the defensive side, in my opinion. The offense had limited opportunities. They were losing the time of possession battle up into the third quarter in that game. But even last week, it was kind of like a dual-headed slow start, and those are the things you have to avoid. It's hard to like put a finger in terms of like how to do that, right? Is it internally motivated? Is it the team? Is it the coaches? I don't know. I just think it's attention to detail, and the simplest way I can say it is attention to detail and doing your job on every play, one play at a time, whether it's the beginning of the game or the fourth quarter, putting the same amount of emphasis on the call and executing. So that's definitely something that does have to be addressed, because I don't know if this team's built to really play from behind. 2-3 scores, can the offense operate in a fashion where they have to completely abandon the run game and play in a shootout? I don't know. And that's what kind of intrigues me about this USC matchup, is they're a little bit of a wild card themselves. So how does this whole thing play? Who positions themselves in terms of control of the game and kind of the cadence in which the game's going to go? And I see a lot of different scenarios that could play out, again, because you're talking about two very talented rosters.
Yeah, let's talk about it. USC obviously in their opener beats LSU. They took Michigan down to the wire. They've been scrappy at times, a 3-2 record. But it's so much of an unknown, right? This isn't a team where you have a ton of familiarity. You've got a Letterman over there and Danton Lynn. I mean, when you think about the way that this team can kind of cause problems, that unfamiliar aspect, there is a lot of intrigue here.
I mean, I got the chance to watch the opener against LSU, and when you talk about the transition from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten, there's no better test than going down to the SEC, right? And that was a phenomenal football game. I thought they showed grit, toughness. I saw their defense come out and play with a different level of intensity than they have in the past few years. But then to your point, from there on out, they were in a pillow fight with Wisconsin, had to come back and win at the end there. Michigan game, they threw for like 34 yards. So there's a lot of onus on Miller Moss offensively for them. They have great playmakers on the outside. Can that O-line hold up against our defensive pass rush? Definitely a talking point. And then subsequently, what type of defense is going to show up for USC? Is it going to be a physical one that's going to punch you in the mouth and play that type of football? Or is it going to be the one that is kind of lackluster, blowing assignments, we take advantage of it, and then they find themselves in a hole like they did against Wisconsin? But unfortunately, I don't think they're going to be able to overcome that with a team like Penn State and an offense like Penn State on the other side of the ball.
I would just like to give you your flowers here on Nittany Insiders. You called Zane Durant, I think, before the season even started, and the way that he's been disruptive is now getting noticed, I think, by people who don't watch or know football as well as you do. But when you think about this defense and their ability to be disruptive now through 5 games, are you feeling like that momentum is building?
Yeah, I do. I think some things are still rearing their head in terms of just base install 101, blown assignments, getting a little too cute with some disguises in cover 2 and some, again, just basic day one install stuff. But with that being said, I think they're starting to hone in on what they want to do, who they want to be. And from there, I think it's really just adjustments in terms of personnel. Like, where are you putting Abdul? Are you lining him up inside with outside responsibilities, moving him, taking advantage of his athletic ability? What are you doing with the linebacking core? What are you doing with the safeties? How are you inserting them into the run game and the run fits? But not trying to overcomplicate it, because you're at the point in the season where you don't necessarily want to come out with a brand new sheet that could leave you susceptible to some explosive plays, especially against the likes of the USCs, Ohio States of the world. So you really want to hone in on being very fundamentally sound, but also being able to present some issues from a presentation standpoint for the opposing offenses.
I don't think we can get away from it either. Penn State at home for 5 straight weeks, 4 games. They now really hit the road for the first time. West Virginia, a bus trip, a little bit different. They leave a day early. These guys are creatures of habit, especially when it comes to travel. This is the first real test of what it looks like to go out to California, not for a bowl game. How much of an impact do you think that'll make for Penn State? Just all of the travel, all the variables, the first real road trip after that opener against West Virginia. Does any of this matter when you're inside the team?
I mean, I'm gonna be completely honest. As a player, I didn't think about it, but when you start studying the science, obviously there is some science that backs that those things can cause some issues in terms of peak performance, whatever you want to get into. But if I'm in that locker room, it's business as usual. We're going out there a day early. You're going to get acclimated from a sleep standpoint. You're still going to be sitting around waiting in the hotel the same way you would if you were playing at Minnesota or Rutgers. So there's kind of a lot that goes into it, but they're going to be fired up. There's the kind of the untrackable metric of adrenaline and expectation. So I think they're going to be fine. People will probably point to it if they come out flat, but I'm not a buyer.
Nittany Insiders, brought to you by Planet Fitness.
Watch Nittany Nation Game Day on these great stations every week. WFXP in Erie, WHTM in Harrisburg, WPHL in Philadelphia, WYOU in Wilkes-Barre, DC News Now in Washington, and WTAJ in Altoona. You're watching Nittany Nation Game Day.
Wrapping this up quickly, Ryan, who is our player to watch this week?
I'm just going to cheat and say, let's go with the whole secondary. They're in for their biggest test against Miller, Moss, and a host of talented receivers like Zachariah Branch.
How about a key to the game?
Well, Penn State has to start faster. They've gotten off to a slow start most weeks. Visiting teams, as we said, are 1-8 in Big Ten play when traveling to time zones. They cannot afford to have a slow start and overcome that.
My bold predictions, which have not gone great this season, is I think Penn State goes for 250 on the ground in a grinded-out, close win. In the words of Colin Ray, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. It's not real bold. We're not going super bold this week. I'm sorry. That wraps up another week of Nittany Nation Game Day. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. We'll take next week off for Penn State's second bye, but return ahead of the Nittany Lions trip to Madison. For Ryan Riskey, I'm Andrew Clay. Enjoy the game.